Hey everybody, welcome to Rooted the Podcast. My name is Kevin Hu as the Connections Director, and I also have Pastor Kevin Butcher on this podcast this week, and the topic is actually not just shame, but is there such thing as good or healthy shame? And for context, now this isn't a scripted conversation, this isn't something that we've actually talked about in depth before. We're going to just do this on the fly here. And the reason why we wanted to bring this up, or at least I do, is as an Asian American, as someone who grew up in a Chinese household, first generation, we ran by shame. Like, shame is what fuels you to succeed in life. Shame and comparison and looking at other families, other cousins and siblings, and look at how much they've achieved. That stuff is in our DNA. Wow. So when folks talk about an honor and shame culture in Asia or Eastern traditions and things like that, I go, no, I totally resonate with that. And I remember years ago listening to Brene Brown's first talk on shame and talking about honor and shame. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, you're feeding my soul and I feel so much better. But then what I realized is after that talk and feeling so moved by it, I go, I have no motivation. It's hard for me to get motivated because I need to know how I am lacking in order to keep pushing through. And so when I hear, and now I'm going to volley this up for you, Kevin, but for you, when you tell me about the love of God, when you invite us into this place where you don't need anything from us, and I feel that fatherly, motherly kind of acceptance and love, and I go, God, could this really be it? I have to admit, it does paralyze me quite a bit because I still have to be a functional leader. I still have to motivate and move people and organize things, and I need to have drive and passion as a leader. How do I live in that space? How do I navigate this? How do I even begin to think about this? All of that, I'm putting it right there in front of you, Kev.
Well, Kev, I thought this might be a 10-minute podcast, but maybe not. So let me share a couple of thoughts, and then you can interrupt and interject, and then we'll just keep dialoguing. So I think there is a healthy shame. It's unfortunate that unhealthy shame carries the name shame. It's unfortunate, shall I say it this way, that healthy shame has the word shame attached to it because so much of shame is the unhealthy variety. But healthy shame to me is simply recognizing that God is God and we're not him. We're less than. There's one being in the universe that we are less than. It helps us to ground ourselves in a place of humility, recognizing he is perfect. We carry sin, original sin, for those of us who believe that, and I do, and our actual sin. So if you've heard this lately with some of the behavior that we see manifesting across the country these days, there are pundits, from the left and the right, Christian, non-Christian, saying, we need more shame in the world. There's not enough shame. I think they're talking about that kind of shame. People act like they're little gods. They can do whatever they want. They don't have to think about how it impacts anybody. They get to choose. It's this myth of absolute autonomy that could use a little healthy shame. No. I'm a human, but there are others, and there's maybe a higher power, and I just hold my place. It's an important place, but it's not the only place. I would call that a healthy shame.
Yeah, I like how you differentiate that. I was actually thinking of the word humility. You brought that up. You have to be grounded in humility because I go, wow. So this is my concern sometimes when we talk about shame specifically and how we have to come out from under it. I think we're in a time and culture that's like we want to know more about how to feel less shame because I want to feel shameless. I want to be fully proud of who I am, what I am at all times, and don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what's wrong with me. Don't tell me what, like my perspectives might be skewed. I am my own truth. And so that language of not feeling any kind of shame is great. But then what I see is this swing to go from a place where you're filled with shame to where you don't have any shame.
Yeah.
And I would say what's also lacking with that is there's no humility. there isn't this. Yeah, it's like we want to get away from that too.
Exactly. So I think, to me, anyone who has any kind of mature perspective on life is going to understand healthy shame and be willing to live in that place. I don't think that is our largest problem. I think our biggest problem is the unhealthy shame, that feeling that we're never going to measure up, that we're absolutely worthless as a human being. Sandra Wilson, in her book on shame, said it's like us standing on one side of the bridge while the rest of humanity stands on the other side, and they can see us and point at us. I mean, to use the biblical illusion, we're all have sinned to come short of the glory of God. Yeah, but my sin is especially heinous, especially negative. And you and I have, in other words, in my shame, I'm not like other human beings. I'm worse than, I'm less than, and everybody knows it. And so I don't really even deserve to exist. And you and I have talked about this in the past, Kev. We even talked about it at our last pastor's conference, that shame isn't guilt. This kind of unhealthy shame isn't guilt. Guilt can be forgiven. What do you do about shame? Shame is about who you are. Guilt is about what you do. There's forgiveness through the cross for guilt. We confess our sins, 1 John 1:9, and he forgives us, and we're free. We move out again into our living. But with shame, you can't shake it because it's a part of your DNA. You feel like the only antidote to shame is to cease to exist. And so shame becomes the opposite of love, which sets us free. The opposite of that freedom to live in shame is to live locked down, to live with a sense of pathological inability or pathological ineffectiveness or pathological less than-ness that literally consumes you, so that everything that comes out of you is centered in that or impacted by that feeling of shame. I think there are more people that live there than we really realize. And so if Jesus said, or if Paul said, it is for freedom that Christ sets us free, or if John's gospel has Jesus saying, if you know the Son, I mean, the one who has the Son is free indeed. Shame would be the commodity of the enemy that most inhibits us receiving the love of God, which centers us and says our identity comes from him. And he calls us beloved son. He calls us beloved daughter. He says, you're mine. Doesn't mean we're perfect. It just means that he's got us. And that frees us to live into our true selves. Shame tells us your true self is a pile of garbage. And so you need to do everything you can to hide that true self, somehow modify that true self, keep others from knowing that true self. So it's literally living in the opposite of the freedom that we're called to when we know the love of God. It causes us to live absolutely locked down. And here's another impact, Kev. We pass that shame along to the next generation. We parent in shame. We shame our children. Instead of, look, son, I love you, and what you're about right now is hurting you, and that crushes me because I care. It's, you know what the community is saying about your dad because you're doing this and whatever, or, hey, why can't you be like your sister? I mean, all of that kind of parenting is shame-based. And so it just perpetuates generation after generation us living in shame. And then, of course, shame-based followers of Jesus, grown up, give that shame away to the world instead of saying, no, look, we're not trying to convert you. We're not trying to make you a Presbyterian or an Episcopalian or a Baptist or whatever. We're trying to help you know that you're deeply loved. That love has set us free, and we want you to know the one who gives you that love, the one who wants to be not your spiritual life coach, but to be your one great love, and his name is Jesus Christ. Instead of that, we got rules for the lost. We've got, you need to perform, and all of that comes out of our shame. I'll stop. But it's a big package, man, that impacts, as Kurt Thompson said in his book, The Soul of Shame, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and it impacts virtually everything.
Yeah, you're right. This isn't going to take less than 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes to unpack. My brain's all over the place now.
Of course. I saw your eyes while we were talking, and I thought I should stop, but then I couldn't help myself.
No, but like it's so good. But I feel like so many things you said I need to bullet point out and unpack it in different episodes. I mean, just your point about parenting alone.
Yeah.
You know, I've got 2 bio kids and a little foster baby at home right now, and confession. I see it.
Yeah.
I see it. I mean, the other day it broke my heart. My son said to me, he was crying. I mean, he had done something in my eyes, our eyes as parents, pretty bad, you know? And so I came down a little hard on him, and he was crying. I was like, why are you crying? And he was like, because I'm scared.
Oh, my Lord.
I'm scared of you. And I was like, of what? You know, he's like, because you're loud. And I go like, people have every like different parenting philosophies.
Of course, yeah.
You know, but I looked at that and I was like, that is not an emotion that I want my kid to have.
Indeed.
When they think of their father, you know. And it's like, and I'm not talking about like a reverential fear, you know, like a fear of the Lord type deal. Like he was like, yeah, he was almost standoffish. And I go, my gosh, like these are the things, my own brokenness, my own sin, you know, just kind of working its way through. So that hit, and I feel like I need some time to process that one.
By the way, if I can just say this to you, as an older father to a younger father, Kev, you're not going to want to hear this, but I'm going to say to you, well done. And I'll tell you why. All right, you had a moment, but instead of just saying, you're afraid, I'll give you something to be afraid about. I mean, how many of us heard that when we were kids? You listened. Your heart heard his little boy heart. And you said, okay, my son did something that he shouldn't have done. But this reaction of fear, that's not about him. That's about me. I want to heal so that I can give him a pathway for his behavior that is grounded in the love of God, that love that he has for me. I want to give that to my son. That's why I'm saying well done. The key to not parenting with shame is not being perfect. It's owning that this could be a deal, that this is what the enemy does to perpetuate generation after generation of shame-based living, pushing back the love of God and saying, if God will give me courage, if Christ will be my healer, I'll do whatever it takes to say the line stops here. I got a lot of shame in my childhood, you say. I am going to give less of that in the name of Jesus Christ to my son. And he in turn will give less of that to his grandchildren. So Kev, don't let the enemy shame you about the shame. There's a double shame there.
Yeah.
Hear the voice of the Father saying, well done, son. Let's take a look at this. Let's do some healing.
That's good. I don't want to get away.
I think I told you, Kev. I'm sorry to interject this, but
go.
For our listening audience, if they've heard me speak, they've heard this story. But one time when I was just getting in touch with what shame is for me, and the fact that I grew up in shame, and that much of my anger was not just personality based, but shame based. I decided to do this talk. I did some research, and I asked my daughters in our 2 Sunday morning services there in Detroit if they would both do a role play with me. And I think you've heard me tell the story, Kev. And my oldest daughter, just was a perfect little actress. In the first service, I played the angry, shaming dad, and loud voice, and she was just a little girl, maybe 6 or so, 7 maybe. And she, oh, Daddy, don't talk to me like that. That hurts my feelings. And then I, repented and whatnot. And the people got it. They got it. It was a role play. It wasn't real. Second service, my middle daughter, Leanne, the one who's a therapist today, a very sensitive young lady, I started doing the angry dad routine on stage in front of 300 or 400 people. And she basically collapsed emotionally. She stopped and said to me, she looked right up at me. I can never tell this story without weeping. She said, "Daddy, I don't want to do this anymore." And I realized the role play had turned into a reenactment, man. She was like in that moment. She honestly, it was a trauma response, which tells you, I mean, to my shame, to my appropriate shame, I had, as I was healing from my shame, I still continued to give my kids some of that mess from hell. And so I dropped to my knees, crawled over to her, took her in my arms, and I said, "Baby, we don't have to do this anymore. I'm so sorry." And gave her to my wife, who was sitting on the front row. So today, if you ask Leanne, does she know that God loves her? Does she know that I love her? She will say, absolutely, she does. And I'm sharing this story publicly, and I'm sharing it with you, Kev, as a young dad who I love so much. Our struggle does not determine whether our kids will not get the love of God from us. If we don't struggle and just continue to give the shame, of course, they're going to be raised with that shame. It's going to be embedded in them, and that's it. But my daughter knows the love of God because I did the healing work, and I wasn't perfect then. I'm still not perfect. She's 36 years old. I'm still not a perfect, non-shame-based dad. I'm always pushing back that darkness in the name of Christ. But I'm telling you, Kev, your precious son is going to grow up knowing that he is loved by you, loved by Becca, loved by God, because you own this. And you're saying, I will heal. Christ is my healer. We're going to work on this. I'm going to pass back to my previous generation what I don't want to pass on to my kids. And he's going to grow up knowing the love of Christ. He will. And I tell you that real life story so that it kind of has more meaning than me just saying, "Oh, it's going to be okay."
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I feel like this is a good place to land. I just don't know
Fair
how to
enough.
land it.
Yeah.
Like I know, folks. Again, as I'm always confident, like this interaction that we just had. I mean, if y'all could see us, there's tears in both of our eyes.
Indeed.
As we are, again, face to face, not with just the pain, not with even just the reality of God's goodness, His grace, and His love for us, but even just seeing one another right now, the two Kevins right here. I have a mentor, I have a brother, I have a pastor in front of me who is walking with me,
Indeed.
In my shame and pointing me to light. And it's such a gift. I hope that many of you out there have experienced a taste of that on this podcast. Hopefully something we talked about resonated with you. And an invitation, once again, if you are there and you've been listening and you've been on the periphery and you're just saying, you know what, I don't know if I need mentoring. I don't know if I need a pastor because I am a pastor, but I would like to make a connection.
Indeed.
I would like to start a conversation. I would like to taste a little bit of what I just heard today on this podcast, but for me, and I need that. My life needs that. My family needs that. That's why we're here.
Yes.
As Rooted Ministries. And as always, you can go to our website, click on Get Rooted, put in some basic information. You don't have to tell us your whole story. Just say, hey, found you guys out online or on a podcast, and I'd love to connect. And that's what we're here for. So,
That's right.
Yeah, know that we're praying for you. Know that we're with you. We're one of you. And until next time we get to all connect, blessings to all of you.